recording?
Yeah, I'm just getting the live stream going right.
Yeah. This is the annual board of trustees meeting for June 23rd and 27th. I'm sorry, that's not even close to us. For September 15th, 2022. All right, go on file here. And we can start with Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Backren. Mayor Pro Tem Markle. Trustee Weber. Trustee Knutson. Trustee Smith.
Here.
Trustee Valentine.
Present.
Trustee Stelter.
Here.
And I do see that Mayor Backren has joined.
Thank you. So you have a form.
Yes.
The first item on the agenda is approval of agenda. Get and make a motion to approve the agenda. Move to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the only item of business we have today is a presentation from Lisa at Chadwick, Steinfetcher and Davis. Okay.
I just have a procedural question, and that is, I noticed that, Thomas, you have yourself on Zoom. Would it help for Rick and everyone else on Zoom if we had our cameras on at our computers with the sound off? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, as long as not more than one person talks at a time.
Okay, I guess I won't then. My mug isn't up there.
Oh, I also skipped announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? Cool. Didn't think so. All right, so we'll leave it to Lisa. Do I have that right? Okay, and you're muted. Sorry.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay,
Yes.
I'll go ahead with the presentation then. My name is Lisa Heeman. I'm with Chadwick, Steinkirchner Davis. That name's a real mouthful, I know. And I'm the audit director with the firm. And I was the partner in charge of the town of Paonia's audit this year. And I think you guys all have copies of the financial statements, and I'll go briefly through my presentation. And then if you guys have questions, go ahead and ask, and I'll answer everything that I can. I'm going to go through a little bit of what the auditor's job is. The auditor's job is to come in and plan and perform the audit to be able to provide an opinion on the financial statements, which sounds pretty simple when you state it that way. In order to be able to do our job, we have a lot of procedures that we do both during the planning process and the audit process to make sure that we're able to provide that opinion. Some of the things we do during the planning process is look at the internal controls at the town to see if there are any areas where we think there might be additional risk due to internal control weaknesses. We document what we think, the key controls are for the town. Then we go in and we do some walkthrough testing and make sure those controls are in place as described to us. And then we might choose to do some additional testing of internal controls and rely on those internal controls for some of our audit testing. We do a lot of analytical procedures on balances. So with local governments, we focus a lot on comparing prior year information to the budgeted expectations. And that's because that budget is what drives a lot of the decision making during the year. And that's what the board has approved, or that's what the town council has approved and is relying on as well. So if we notice large variances from budget or large variances from prior year also, we dig into that a little bit further to see if we can understand the reasons for those variances and if they indicate risk areas. We review board minutes for the year. So we look at board minutes throughout the entire year. And then we look at board minutes after year end too, to make sure that we've covered everything that could impact the financial statements, and we've identified things that maybe should be disclosed. We look at grant agreements and correspondence from grantors and oversight agencies. So if a grantor came in and did an audit of a program during the year, or there was some new grant, we would look at the grant agreements. We would look at results of any oversight audits by outside agencies. And then we look at any correspondence from the state with regards to the town's finances. And then we do a lot of inquiry of management and others in the organization. So we spend most of our time talking to the finance department, but we also reach out and inquire of one of the board members. And off the top of my head, I can't remember who my in-charge talked to this year, but we reach out so that we can get the perspective of other people about what they think the risks are at the town. Once we have all that together, so once we've looked at all the internal control processes, we've looked at any new activity and we've identified risks, we put together our audit plan. And our audit plan includes identifying the risk areas in the audit, focusing primarily on those, but looking at all the areas where we determine they are material to the financial statements and if misstated could mislead readers of the statements. We confirm balances by looking at confirming bank and debt balances from outside parties. So for bank statements, we don't just rely on the bank statements as provided by management. We also confirm those with the bank since they're a third party and more reliable or can be relied better upon. We also do the same with debt balances. So if there are large debt balances at a local government, we'll also confirm those balances. We perform further analytics on individual balances in each of the areas of the financial statements. And we'll do things like if you sell water or if you sell trash services, we'll get other information like the number of users and make sure that the revenue looks reasonable based on the number of users you have or the number of gallons of water you sold or other balances like that. We also trace transactions to underlying support. So we do this on a sample basis, and we will sample maybe disbursements from a particular area and trace those to underlying documentation like invoices, check stubs, bank statements, and receipts. So again, we're just verifying that the information, that the balances look reasonable in the financial statements. We look at a lot of general ledger detail. We've reviewed journal entries. So journal entries are one of those risk areas in an audit because that's something that is not going through the regular financial accounting system. It's something that's being corrected or adjusted by management or the finance department. So we look at all of the journal entries during the year and subsequent to year end and try to identify those that look unusual or are particularly large. And then we test those as part of our audit to make sure that they're reasonable. We also pay attention to any year-end audits or year-end journal entries that are posted to close out the year to make sure they look reasonable as well. We have some required communication that we're required to give to the town council. So if there were gray areas in the financial statements where we thought some balance could be shown more than one way, or if some of the guidance from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board is unclear about how a transaction should be handled, we would report that to you. And we didn't have any gray areas in the financial statements this year. The accounting policies were consistent with the prior year. There were no changes, and there were no unusual transactions that required reaching out either to the Governmental Accounting Standards Board or to somebody else to determine how it should be posted. We look at if we had significant journal entries as part of our audit, we would be required to report that to you. And we didn't really have significant adjusting journal entries as part of the audit this year. Everything was pretty clean. I think we had one adjustment that we worked with Cindy on, and it was just to recognize grant revenue properly. And the reason for that adjustment is because the town got some grant revenue, but hadn't quite spent it in the way that the grant required yet. So some of that revenue got deferred until the next year. And the idea with governmental accounting standards is that revenues and expenses should match up for grant programs like that. And that's the reason you defer some of it. If we had disagreements with management, either about something in the financial statements or something in the audit report, or we felt like we weren't getting the information that we needed, we would report that to you, whether or not in the end we all agreed. So whether or not we settled our differences, we would report that to you, and we didn't have any such disagreements this year. And then we are also required to report any internal control findings to you, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I mentioned that we do journal entry review. Auditing standards just require that we do this. And one of the reasons is because one of the reasons we look at those year-end journal entries is because we realize that all year long, the city council relies on the financial information provided by the finance director. So at the end of the year, if they're having to do a lot of unusual journal entry activity to make the financial statements or to clean them up for the audit and for final issuance, then it might indicate that the information that you're looking at in the audited financial statements is far different from what you've been using all year to make decisions. So we kind of look to make sure that there are no significant or unusual entries at the end of the year that would indicate that the information during the year wasn't consistent, if that makes sense. And we didn't notice anything unusual. I mentioned the significant adjustment we had was just to recognize grant revenue in the proper period. And that's something that Cindy worked with us on. The town did have improvements this year. So every year that we've been doing the audits, we've seen small improvements. Every year we've made recommendations, pointed out any weaknesses that were in the internal control structure. And the finance department has worked to improve those every year. This year, there were a decreased number of journal entries again. And then the finance department performed a thorough review of the financial statements this year that was really good. Cindy and Corinne both went through the financial statements pretty thoroughly and asked pretty good questions and pointed out some things that needed to be corrected in the statement and some reclassifications. So that was good. Internal control findings. A material weakness is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control that make it extremely possible that a material weakness could happen in the financial statements and not be caught on a timely basis. Last year, we had material weaknesses, I believe, related to the number of journal entries that we had during the audit and just the significance of the entries. And this year, we didn't have any material weaknesses as a result of field work. So that was a good improvement. A significant deficiency is also required to be reported if we identify one. A significant deficiency is less severe than a material weakness, but important enough to merit attention. Again, we just have this weakness that is related to be able to put together a whole set of financial statements. And this is a common weakness that we have with local governments where we're doing the financial statements and they don't have the means to put together the whole financial statements on their own. So we're required to report that as a significant deficiency. And I did note, as I said earlier, that town personnel have made great strides in the current year in correcting some of that. So I feel like every year they get better at understanding how the financial statements are put together and understanding how all of the balances tie into the final financial statements and footnotes, including the pension information that gets reported in those two statements right at the front of the statements. I'm grateful to the town, to the staff of the town of Paonia for friendly, cooperative, and prepared for the audit this year. That was really good. And then I'll also mention we did give an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. So if you looked at the statements, our opinion report is right at the front, and it's about an extra page longer than it was in the prior year. That's because our auditing standards changed. They moved the opinion up to the top of the audit report. And then added some information about the auditor's responsibility as far as the audit and the financial statements go and management's responsibility. So there's just a little more information there for you. Did anybody have questions for me?
Paige?
I just have a very basic question. When you say journal entry, are you simply referring to a debit and a credit going into the general ledger?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions? Okay, Paige again?
I have one more question, and it is, which grant you had to do some further looking into? Do you remember?
Oh, let me pull that up really quick and see if I can find it right away.
The CDOT grants, so they are slow at processing the refund.
Thank you.
Lisa, I had a question regarding
Okay.
this significant deficiency. Are there tools or training that you can recommend to help us produce a whole set of financial statements that would avoid that deficiency in the future?
You know, some of my clients, most of my clients have us prepare the financial statements because they just don't have resources or table. It's not a common efficiency. There are some software programs out there that assist local governments with putting together those financial statements. I can think of one client that uses a software program, and I'm not sure what it's called, but I could get that for you. But it's common for local governments not to have that ability.
Yeah.
And then we
that's my understanding.
provide, yeah,
Yeah, if you could send that to the board or rather to, I suppose, Corinne, and she can.
Okay.
Our information.
okay. All right.
Anybody else have any questions? Sorry?
We're going to be talking about the presentation of the audit, correct?
No, this is, my understanding is this is the time to ask questions regarding the audit.
Everything.
If you want answers, that was a good time.
Well, and I just want to make sure Lisa was finished with your presentation.
I am. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I'm going to launch into my questions or.
Yeah. This is Trustee Paige Smith who's speaking.
You know, 1 second, let me catch up to myself in terms of the pagination. The first thing you said was that you have changed your template and your opinions are there in the very beginning. And so one of the things I was looking for and didn't see, and maybe it's implied, is that in some of the discussion about an audit, it is that we are in, what was the terminology? Essentially, we're good to go. We are good to go.
Yes.
We have done fine.
Yes, you got an unmodified opinion, which means that you have a clean opinion.
Okay, unmodified.
No
opinion.
issues. Yes.
Hang on. And then I noticed some new language in your letter, which is on it's page 8 of our packet. Let me try to get you to your audit off. It's page, I don't know, it's your second to the last page, I think, in your audit letter. Yes, and it's a bunch of bullet points that seem to be new in the letter. Is that a new boilerplate that you've had to include for law because the law changed, or?
Yes. Yeah, that's a result of the change in our audit regulation. And so they've added more information to the report. So there's a better understanding of what the audit entails or what the auditor takes responsibility for.
Thank you. So I have other questions, but some of them have to do with the MDA, which I know you have nothing to do with. So
Okay.
I'm going to skip over those and maybe I'll put those in writing to Cindy. But in general, as I read through this, it was confusing to me because there's various terms of art, as in, let's see, fund balance versus, oh gosh, and
Is it fun?
net asset, net versus fund balance. So one way that I might be able to get my questions answered in an overarching way is if we could go to pages 72, 73, and 74, which deal with the water, sewer, trash.
Okay, and those are, let me see.
And that, again, I'm sorry, those are the pages in the packet. I can give you a page number for the audit. As soon as I get there. In the audit, the first one is page 64.
Okay,
So my questions probably generally have to do with the summations at the bottom of the columns. And my overarching question is the second column to the left, third column to the right, shows 610,788 available working capital versus ending net
Okay.
position 154,155. So my question is, which of these numbers shows money that is available for the next budget year? And I guess maybe I should just ask, what does the 610,000 mean versus the 154,000 number?
the available working capital does closely represent the current assets that you have available for your next year's budget. That net position will include any long-term liabilities that you have. So the long-term liability will decrease your net position just because it's hanging out there as a liability, but it doesn't necessarily represent what you have in cash that's available for the next year, if that makes sense.
So the 154 is a positive number.
Yes.
Is that taken away from the 610,000 in terms of available balance for the next budget year? Are they completely two different numbers and not related?
Change in net position just includes the long-term items and things that aren't necessarily available in cash to be spent or don't represent cash that is going to be spent in the next year. So that 154 includes all the long-term debt. You're not going to have to pay all of that in the next year. And it also includes all your long-term assets. So fixed assets and things like that that aren't liquid and aren't going to be able to be spent. So that's what that 154 includes. The 610 excludes all of that stuff and shows it more on a modified accrual basis, basically.
Thank you. So that 610,000 is, I'm going to call it excess, that money that was not spent in 2021 in the water fund, which is available to be brought into the 2022 budget. And at that point, I'm sure there's a percentage that has to be maintained, but would that be considered the beginning reserves in the water budget?
You know, that would be a good question for Cindy. We don't look into the budget process that closely, but ideally that would be the amount of the current assets that you have available for your budget in the next year.
All right.
And yes, Paige, that is the number that we use for the enterprise water fund balance,
All right.
city fund balance.
Thank you. And which means that moving down to the next page for sewer, we've got then a beginning fund balance of 1.3 million based on that same column.
Yes, it looks
Okay.
that way.
So then my question to Cindy is, when we see the next budget to actual, now that the audit is finished, will we see these two numbers commensurate or respectively in water and sewer as beginning reserves?
Correct.
Or is we will? Okay, so it's that simple. It's that direct. Okay. And then I just want to go down into the trash now that that's been made. So in the trash fund, we will have a excess beginning reserves of 142,652. Therefore, the negative ending net position of 5,362 is not necessarily a major concern. That's just showing we have negative money available for long-term debt and long-term assets in the trash. Is that
And that negative 5,362 is just the change in net position. So the actual net position in the trash fund is 277,938. And that 5,362 is just your revenues over expenses for the year on a
Okay.
budget. Yeah.
Right. Let's.
For information that, it was budgeted to use reserves, for the trash fund last year. That's why that is like
Can I just ask a follow-up question, Cindy? And are you referring to the 5,362?
that. Correct.
Okay. I have other questions, but at this point I will stop and let others ask while I catch up with myself. Thank you.
John, you have anything to ask? No. Okay. Rick? Guess that's a no. Okay, all right, so Lisa, we do have a couple of folks from the public here. Would you be open to answering questions from the public? Feel free to say no.
I can answer a couple.
Okay, yes, Karen?
I just wanted to remind that Rick has a hearing issue, so he may not have heard you, and that Mayor Backron is on as well.
Can we type a message to Rick to see if he has any questions? Sorry, not the video up.
I have some questions.
Oh,
Has no question.
okay. Thanks, Rick. Okay, anybody from the public? Would you like to ask a question? Okay, we have one question or one questioner. Come on up under the speakers and identify yourself so Lisa can know who you are.
Hi, Lisa Christine Patterson.
Hi.
You said you have categorization of unmodified opinion, which is good to go. And what are some of the other categories that you have there? Is there a number of them, or?
You mean unmodified opinion is all that I've given on these financial statements. If the financial statement presented, then we might have a modified opinion or an adverse opinion on the financial statements, but that's not the case here.
So it's just those two, unmodified or adverse?
It's unmodified, modified, or adverse, but we just have an unmodified opinion on these
Great.
statements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. More question from the public? Identify yourself so Lisa knows who you
This
are.
is Suzanne Watson. And I'm just wanting to know, I don't know, this might be a question more for Cindy than the auditor, but what are franchise taxes? I'm looking at page 58 of the packet, which is 51 of the audit. And also on page 24 of the packet, we have franchise taxes and an amount of $56,420. So I'd like a definition of what a franchise tax is.
If it's the franchise fee, it's the same thing.
Well, you're charging sales tax on the franchise tax.
Okay,
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
please.
I guess if I'm comfortable with this, because it's been looked at, because how can you charge tax on the tax? I didn't think that was legal to charge tax on a tax. And I don't know, I guess that's probably too much minutia for the auditor. But I'd like to bring this to the board's attention because this is a definite concern to me. Thanks.
That's an issue that share an interest in myself. Anyone else have questions? Paige, you have more to follow up with?
Yes, if I may, on page 31 of the packet. Hang on, let me get you the commensurate audit page 25.
Okay.
And I'm just curious about cash at the end of the year is noted as 1.819352. And I just don't understand the significance of that number in relation to all the other totals we've seen for water, sewer, trash.
That's just the total amount of cash at the end of the year, and it doesn't include any investment. So it's just the cash that's available, and it includes restricted and unrestricted cash.
31.
And the cash flow statement's just meant to show this is how the cash actually flowed, regardless of any accruals for receivables or payables at the end of the year. It strips out any payables, receivables, long-term debt, assets, and says this is what you actually spent cash on during the year.
And if I might have a follow-up, so that simply means that was the amount spent. It has nothing to do with any reserve excess funds for the 2022 to be used for the future. It is simply a reporting of amounts in and out, or in.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And- Oh, page 42 in the packet and page 36 of the audit. And I'm looking at the second paragraph, interest rate risk.
Okay.
And my question is, we don't have a formal policy, and is that something a small town should have? Are we at risk at all of by not having a risk rate policy?
You know, it's not a huge risk, I don't think, just because the state statutes have policies too. So what I think a lot of local governments do is just adopt those state statute policies. You could look at that and see if you want to do something different, but it's not a huge risk that I see.
And if I might, so based on this, the content here, we have tacitly adopted the state statute risk standard, but we don't have anything in writing, I don't think, but that we would defer to the state statute should there push come to shove. The state
Yes.
statute would apply without us directly adopting a policy.
Yes. Yeah, the state statutes apply to all the local governments.
Without having to do something proactive.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Cindy?
We do have an investment policy and it just state that was adopted many, many years ago. And it just simply says that we're going to follow the state statute.
Thank you. Can I look at one more page? 1 second. On page 66, packet 58 page. A second, I have trouble getting there.
This is page 58 in the audit, you said?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So again, I am curious as to, these are the general funds. So the funding balance ending 192051, does that have significance in terms of excess funds at the end of the 21 budget year?
Yes, that should pretty closely mirror what you have in your current assets at the end of the year.
Okay.
So that should be pretty close because these are governmental funds. So they're accounted for different than your water, sewer, and trash funds. And they are close to a budgetary basis and show more closely what you actually spent in cash during the year. And then they also just include current assets and current liabilities. So really, the fund balance really is a pretty good reflection of what you have current at the end of the year.
Thank you. I think that ends my questions on the part of the audit that does not have to do with the MDA. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? Mary, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we have a couple of things, follow-ups. Tools to remedy the training. I guess that's the only thing that I had from Lisa. Lisa, would you be, are we okay to email you follow-up questions if we come up with something else?
Yeah.
Say in the next week or so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks. We'll get your contact information from Ryan. Cindy?
Yes.
Can you, Lisa, can you comment on the fact that, the fact that we don't create the financial statements and the notes completely as to, is why that's there and why you have commented on that and whether you see that as something the town needs to fix, or if it's something that's normal for our size municipality, and it's just something that you're required to note in the financial audit.
Are you talking about putting together a full set of financial statements?
Yeah, the weakness that you mentioned, the significant weakness that you mentioned that
Right.
has been there for several years and it is improving. Can you comment on the fact that how that works for a small municipality and whether that's something that the town should be fixing, or if it's something that's normal for our size municipality?
It's pretty normal. And I think what the town needs to do is look at the cost benefit of trying to be able to acquire the tools to be able to do that. And so I think it's a cost benefit question, but I think a lot of local governments have that same issue. And it's common for local governments to have their auditors or to have another third party assist them with the financial statement preparation, just because governmental financial statements are so complex and can be difficult to put together. And I think what the town focuses on throughout the year is more budgetary information. And so that full set of financial statements isn't something that's being put together on a regular basis. And it's just a big task at the end of the year that a lot of local governments rely on someone else to do that job for them, if that makes sense.
Thank you for reiterating that, Lisa. Okay, so if no one else has any questions, that's the only item on our agenda.
Okay.
I was informed by Cindy that we do not require a motion at today's meeting. That this will be on the following agenda, so we don't have to actually take any action today. And that means that we are finished. Thank you very much for your time, Lisa. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And all the hard work you've
Let me
done.
know if you have any further questions.
We will send an email. And thanks for everybody else for being here. Wrapping up the meeting, we got a how did we do? How do you really counts? This is like a test one, Cindy.
Did you want to go over the MDMA?
If you want to, I just have a couple of questions and then what looks like a discrepancy, but, or.
No, this is a good time.
Okay.
Your questions are valid. And
Okay.
this is the right time to ask them.
All right, then let me catch up to myself. So I am on page 4 of the packet.
Okay.
Actually, I take that back. I am on page 10 in the packet. And what I am on.
An audit number, audit.
Yes,
Audit
hang on
page.
1 second, let me catch up. Yes, it is. I can always scroll. Yeah. Page 4. Method to that number 4 madness. My question is, item number 2. The assets of the town of Paonia exceed its liabilities at the close of the fiscal year by 15 million. Of this amount, 2,831,534 is unrestricted net position. So, and may be used to meet the town's ongoing obligations. So is that a cumulative amount of money that can be brought forward into this budget and future budget years?
Can you give me a number?
Oh.
please?
I'm sorry, it's if you're on page, are you on page 4?
Yes.
Notable financial statement, and I'm looking at the entry number 2. That beginning, and it has a table associated with net position, total net position, unrestricted. Comparing 3 years. And it's under the top, the capitalized, bolded, notable financial statement
That
comparisons.
comes out page 17 of the audit,
Okay,
total between governmental and business type.
and this isn't the amount of money left over from the 2021 budget year, is it?
No.
Okay, because mostly I'm trying to understand, and thank you for humoring me to understand this, the terms of art used in financial reporting. So I don't know, is an unrestricted net position? What is a synonym for that in terms of real life?
So it depends on which part of which report you're looking at. On that report, that includes long-term assets and debt, where that's why it has to be calculated for working capital, because you have to take those factors out to determine the amount that we can actually use out of the enterprise fund. So that the ones that you were asking about earlier, ask Lisa about, that is the working capital portion or the usable fund balance versus the net position.
Okay, thank you. And let's see. Item 3 has same page, just entry number 3, change in cash position increase for a total of 3.8 million and an increase of 1.09. And is that all revenue combined? Since it's governmental activities and business type activities encompass all of our fund categories, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so, so this cash position, again, that is not necessarily revenue. This is including things that you just talked about, debt or. Is that
That
right?
includes general fund plus enterprise fund.
And is that money that was taken in total, or because here's the reason I'm asking. So our budget, I don't know what the total budget was for 2021, but our budget this year is $6 million. This value in number 3 in no way encompasses everything that would be included in a total budget.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
One is not related to the other.
Okay. Let's see, then. Oh, number 5, long-term liabilities, same page. I was wondering, what is an RUS loan?
It is on page. It starts on page 37 of the audit.
Okay.
And where it talks about the long-term liability, and RUS is. Utilities law,
Thank you.
which we do not have any longer.
And
It's through USDA.
thank you.
It was through USDA. It's now a bond issued through AMCO.
Oh, okay.
We refinanced it.
Thank you. Then so I just wanted to say on page. If we could look at page 16, hang on, let me get you to the page and then. Yeah. audit itself. And in the audit, this is page 10. And I was curious about on the table. Oh, unrestricted, so on the table at the top of that page, under the 2021 column, unrestricted is at 1.222 million. And so I was very confused as to what that unrestricted actually refers to.
So that means that, that is money that can be used versus for any purpose versus something that has to be used for a specific purpose.
And does that constitute money that was that spent in 2021?
So that's what's available in the future.
Okay,
It's not to use, it's unrestricted. Those are unrestricted funds where you have up above restricted.
okay. So, so do you have a single number? Like, let me just back up if I can continue.
Sure.
That 1222, is that going to be shown in our budget across the various fund categories that have extra money? So we are actually sitting a little better in our governmental funds in terms of having money left that we could use in 2022 than we may currently understand at this point. And it actually makes us a little bit more, we have a little bit more leverage for spending for in 2022 and continuing into future budget years.
We have more unrestricted funds to use
Okay.
in the future.
And if I may follow up just to say, so when we get our next budget to actual report in the packet, will you be able to identify these sources of funds that we now are aware of in the 2022 budget?
Actually, already.
Oh, it is. Could I ask when we have our next budget to actual, maybe point out those places where these funds exist?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And probably my last question. I actually have two more questions. And the next one is on the next page. It would be page 17. And it looks like a discrepancy if you look at the general fund, the second small table on that page. Well, the general fund is the chief operating fund of the town of Paonia. There was an unassigned fund balance of 718,221, but the table right below it has a different value. I'll let you catch up.
I'll have to get back with you on that one.
Okay, and then the last question is on page 20, the next, and I'll get you. It is page 14. Packet, and I was curious about.
What's the audit page
Audit page is, thank you.
as well?
14.
And I had a question about the item entry 17, capital improvement.
Okay.
And I just wondered what public works void vehicles were ordered, and they have not arrived. I just don't remember public works vehicles. I wonder if you could just
They're
describe.
coming Friday, they're being delivered on Friday, but
So, and what are those vehicles? Are they trucks?
they're trucks.
Were they? And that was were they? Was it
That
90?
was the 90,000.
90,000, okay, all right. Wasn't sure about that, and then. And then just as a clarification, underwater repair, number 18, that the water system analysis grants, that's the JDS report, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and there's no mention in here of the moratorium. I wonder if that could be added just for posterity. Make it clear that was part of the impetus. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Do you have anything else? Please follow up by email. All right, Anybody have anything else? Okay. All right, then we're adjourned. We can go home.